Hello, you're listening to Unspun Live, the Herald's new political podcast. I'm Rebecca Mccurdy, political correspondent at the Herald. I'm joined by my colleague Hannah Brown.
Hello.
We are here for an exciting episode where Hannah has interviewed Scottish Greens co-leader Lorna Slater. It's been a quiet week in Holyrood, but as always it's not been quiet in Scottish politics. Hannah, can you take us through what's been happening?
Yeah, so it was the Scottish Greens conference at the weekend there, and we caught up with Lorna Slater before that. She was talking to me about various issues, from infighting in her political party to the issue of gender as well, and also potentially a Butte House Agreement 2.0. Ooh.
Lots to discuss then. I'm really interested in that infighting line because I know that's something we've been covering quite a lot. We've had some insiders say that if Lorna Slater runs again, she risks reputational damage for her party.
Yeah, so said that to you, didn't they?
Yeah, so I wondered if you put that to her and if she was concerned at all. What was her mood like?
It was interesting because at the same time I was talking to Lorna Slater, Patrick Harvey was giving interviews and talking about this issue of reputational damage and the infighting that you mentioned. He was quite candid. He said, our party does have to address this, and going forward we need to be more cohesive and more united. Whereas Lorna Slater, in her interview with me, refused that there was infighting, and I think that's primarily to do with the fact that we were just ahead of the conference. It was Friday when we spoke. The conference was full day on Saturday, and she didn't want to give members a kind of bad vibe going in. So she said to me that no, there's no infighting. It's an exciting vibrancy that's in the party. And I've been speaking to sources who were at the conference since then, and they were saying, it was an exciting vibrancy. It was quite uplifting. It feels like we're going somewhere now. The Greens have got a bit of momentum in them. They've seen really good polling results for them of returning more MSPs to Holyrood come next year. They're quite motivated by that. However, this source also said that there's still that discontent view. When Patrick Harvey gave his final speech, some people didn't stand up. There was a standing ovation, but some didn't. So there's still this issue of certain voices not being quite happy with the current leadership and where the Greens going at the moment.
So I thought it was quite interesting that Lorna kind of didn't acknowledge that. Do you think part of that could be, she is still running for co-leader? Do you think it's part of it is she doesn't want to kind of create this atmosphere that there's something wrong within the party, but potentially by not doing that she risks just making it worse?
Exactly. I think some people want a bit more honesty, and people want honesty from their politicians. So when we see that they're not perhaps accepting that something is the case when it's very clear to us, various sources have stepped forward and spoken to us in the past month or so. I think Andrew Learmonth, our political editor, described it as bun fighting in amongst the Greens, which I found quite funny, but it's the truth that they do have a serious problem. So I think, some people might be annoyed, but then other people, I think, within the Greens will go, it's understandable. She wants to bring a good mood to conference. Maybe we just need to keep positive and stay directed as a one party and not split off into these different groups.
I'm interested in the Butte House 2.0 discussion, because I know that when you interviewed Lorna, she said that she was totally happy with everything that the Greens did in government, and she felt like everything went really well. Obviously there will be a portion within her party that thinks that they didn't get everything they should have. What kind of was your takeaway from what she said? We
know that so many people were unhappy with the Greens in government. There was definitely a group who were happy that they were there, but quite a few SNP politicians and members gave a sigh of relief when they left government, and were quite happy to see them going. Her takeaway was we pushed the government, we got them out of their comfort zone on certain issues around rent freezes and renters' rights and issues around the Homes and Heatings Bill, although she did say that she was very discontent with John Swinney backtracking on that now, shelving it essentially. So I think my takeaway from that is that the Greens want to portray themselves as a party that can push the government with radical views that they've got. They can push the government to go further and faster in issues like renters' rights, homes and heating bill, and all of that. But for many people, for the public, there was a negative perception of the Greens in government, and that question of, did they achieve much? The Greens would argue 100% they did.
Yeah.
Other people, maybe younger generation of the public, will argue that they did, and it was good to see that voice, that what they would describe as a left progressive voice in government. But yeah, quite interesting that there were no notes really on.
Yeah, because I mean, I think the main thing that comes to mind for a lot of people when they think about the Scottish Greens in government is the deposit return scheme, huge policy that ended up kind of really backfiring on the Greens and on the Scottish government. But then, on the other hand, they must be doing something right, because polling obviously does suggest that they are, I think it's 10 was the latest, 10 MSPs was the latest projection. You know, so something must be going right there. People, it can't all be terrible from what they did agree.
Definitely, and I mean, you know, with the deposit return scheme, the Greens will argue, well, that was something that was blocked by the UK government. It wasn't our problem. So they've got a defence for that as well. But yeah, interesting that Lorna Slater basically had no notes from her time in government.
Yeah, very fascinating. Very, very fascinating. And then obviously you guys had quite a candid discussion on gender. We currently have a situation in Holyrood where there are only 2 female leaders. So Lorna Slater as co-leader of the Scottish Greens, and then Ash Regan as the Alba Holyrood leader. Yeah. I think it was like between roughly 2017, the last time we had Ruth Davidson, Nicola Sturgeon, Maggie Chapman was in charge for the Greens, Kezia Dugdale for Labour. You know, quite a female-dominated political circle at FMQs really, and nowadays, you know, aside from Lorna Slater and Ash Regan, it's very, very male-centric. What was she telling you?
Definitely. So, I mean, she mentioned that period between 2015 and 2017 when those 4 female leaders, as you mentioned, were in place, and she said, you know, we feel nostalgic for those days. She said we, and I wonder who that we she's referring to are. Maybe the women in Parliament feel nostalgic for those days, maybe just the general public feel nostalgic for those days. And she was saying that was the reason because many people feel like, or she certainly felt, that we have not as a respectful or collegiate was the word that she used, Parliament, and now that women are no longer there. She said that, you know, women led the fore in making sure there was cross-party constructive conversations going on. She managed to give the spin that, you know, when the SNP and the Greens were together, that was a collegiate and respectful approach, you know. But you look at other parties, you look at, you know, strong female voices in both Labour and the Conservatives, and I think one in the Lib Dems, and you see that they have also got strong female voices who've stood up for women's rights and women's issues. So yeah, I think she was very keen to put that spin on it as well, but definitely interesting what she's saying, because I mean, right now I think our MSP divide is we've got about 45% who are women and 55% who are men, so that's not as bad as the leadership.
And then we've got a lot of women stepping down as well, like I think.
That's right, like with the SNP we're seeing like 13 female MSPs who are stepping down. And
we've got a lot of high profile figures in the Conservatives. Liz Smith is stepping down, Beatrice Wishart, the only female Liberal Democrat MSP, she's stepping down. So, I mean, what about 2026?
I know, well, come 2026, I mean, I've been speaking to all the political parties about this, what their approach is to ensure that they have a gender balance and that they improve upon that. I think they're worried. They're worried that they won't get as many female MSPs stepping up. And, you know, a lot of them are going, I think all the political parties are going through their selection processes right now for candidates. And it's definitely been an issue. I mean, some of them have got strategies, for example, shortlisting as the contest goes on or as the selection process goes on, to ensure that basically you have a lot of men stepping up to go as candidates, and maybe not as many women. So it's just to balance it out a wee bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely interesting to see how Holyrood 2026 will look like in terms of the gender balance. So yeah, I mean, I guess without further ado, shall we play the Lorna Slater interview?
Let's see it.
Lorna Slater, co-leader of the Scottish Greens, thank you very much for joining us on Unspun Live, the Herald's new politics podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. It is an exciting time in politics.
Yes, as you were saying earlier today, I think, so we need to make it clear that we are here in Stirling ahead of the conference. So our podcast goes out on Monday, but we're obviously speaking before that. How are you feeling about the conference going ahead?
Scottish Green conferences are always exciting to get everyone together. Of course, we're a year out from a Holyrood election. So that will be the main topic, of course, of discussion, is how we energize the party, get people trained up to go out canvassing, knocking on doors, what we're going to develop for our manifesto, and of course, who our candidates are going to be. We have yet to select our candidates. We're hoping to see a really diverse group of talented people put themselves forward for selection. So yeah, an exciting time for us.
What's your main focus for Holyrood 2026, for example? Do you have any target seats? Are you hoping to gain more MSPs?
The Scottish Greens have been polling reliably to increase our MSP group. We've shown how influential we can be with 7 MSPs. Of course, we elected 8, and then Alison Johnson went to be presiding officer. We know we can be so much more influential with a larger team of MSPs. Whether we're in government, as we were for 3 years, or whether we're out of government, we know we can push the SNP to go further, to do better, to do more for the climate, more for nature, more to tackle poverty, and of course, all the important things around equalities and making Scotland a greener and fairer place.
So based on polling and your own kind of efforts, do you see yourself gaining more MSPs? Do you have a number in mind?
We are polling to increase our MSP group. It would be great to get an MSP in every region of Scotland. We would very much hope to get 2 or maybe 3 in some regions of Scotland. The more green MSPs we have, the more influence, of course, that we have. One of the really important things for us is that that's a diverse group of MSPs. We want to see lots of underrepresented people in Parliament, a mix of ages and experiences, so that we can really feel that we are properly representing Scotland.
Let's turn to leadership now. And obviously we know that Patrick Harvey, your co-leader, is stepping down after 17 years. How do you feel about this?
I'm going to really miss Patrick. It's been wonderful to work with him since I was elected co-leader in 2019. Having a mix of a team where we had someone with so much experience, not only in Parliament, but in media. When I came in as a really new person with no experience at all in these areas, having him to work with has been fantastic. So I'm excited about there being a new leadership team for the party, because we are in this position of growth, of having more green MSPs, more councillors. There's an exciting vibrancy in the party, but I will really miss working with Patrick.
You mentioned an exciting vibrancy, but sources close to the Herald have mentioned that they're worried about you stepping up for leadership again because you're rerunning. They say that it could risk reputational damage. What do you make of these sources, and do you agree with them?
We are expecting a really exciting and energetic competition this summer for that co-leader team. Because the party is doing so well and has grown so much, we do expect to see different people putting forward their visions for what they want the Scottish Greens to be. The leadership competition is open to every single member. All you need is 2 nominations. So I expect and hope that we'll have lots of people coming forward from within the general membership, from within the MSP group, so that lots of people, including myself, can put forward our pitch for what we think the Scottish Green Party should be going forward, and how we really present that progressive case. Because something we all agree on is that we want to stake out that ground, continue to hold that progressive ground in Scotland, whether it's tackling the climate crisis, rolling out more free school meals, free bus travel for under 22s, all those policies that make Scotland greener and fairer, as well as opposing the rise of the far right. We see this with Reform, who will be coming in and campaigning in Scotland next year in the election. they're pulling the Tories and Labour into their wake with xenophobic policies, anti-climate policies, and the Scottish Greens are going to stand strong. We are a progressive party. We're not shy about that. And we will continue to want to tax the rich. We will continue to want to tackle the climate emergency.
Saying Greens are standing strong, but there's clearly a problem with infighting within your own party.
The Scottish Greens are a democratic party, and we pride ourselves on our energetic debates. We definitely want to see different people come forward to stand to be candidates, to stand for the co-leader team, and the democratic process whereby members get their vote will be a way in which we can sort through that and create both a new leadership team, but also a new great team of MSPs.
Are you confident that you could win the leadership? And if so, who would you consider working with? There's been a chat about, potentially councillors could be new co-leaders. It doesn't need to be a parliamentarian. Would you work with them?
It doesn't need to be a parliamentarian. You're exactly right. I was elected co-leader when I was not a member of parliament. The way that the election works is that people can run as a team if they want to, but the voting doesn't allow voting for teams. So the co-leadership team will be made up of the person who gets the most first preference and transfers, and the person who gets the second most first preference and transfers. So it is absolutely up to the membership who that new co-leader team is going to be. And I will put forward my pitch, and all the other candidates will put forward their pitch. And I'm looking forward to some really energetic hustings.
You're not worried though that there's so many voices who are saying that they're worried about you running for leadership?
I don't really understand that. It's a democratic process. I'm going to put my hat in the ring. There'll be other people doing that. And of course, it is up to party members to decide who they want their leadership team to be. In a democratic process, as many people coming forward as possible to give the voters choice is the best thing.
Do you regret announcing that you'd stand for leadership on TikTok? A few people have said that you've, put yourself in the hat. You've put your name in the hat before you really should have.
That's not true. That's not a rule. I've been saying for months, whenever asked, am I standing again? I've been saying that for months.
I guess turning to Butte House, we mentioned that earlier. John Swinney on the podcast last week said he just wouldn't rule out working with the Greens if there was, say, another Butte House agreement come Holyrood 2026. Are you open to talks about this?
Whether to go into any sort of cooperation agreement or stand back and be in opposition would be for our members to decide. As with the Butte House agreement, the proposal would be presented to members and they get to vote on that. And I think that's a really interesting debate to have within our party, because when you go into government, you have a lot more influence. You can get a lot more done, but necessarily you have to make compromises. Budgets only stretch so far. Legal processes to bring forward legislation take time and take consultation. So there's a legitimate question for our members to debate as to whether we want to be the kind of party that goes into government, gets things done, but then needs to make those compromises, or whether we'd prefer to be a party of opposition where we don't need to make compromises. We can continue to hold radical views, but we maybe struggle to get that fully implemented. But it's a lively debate to have, and I'm excited that we are having it. The arithmetic of what the Scottish Parliament looks like next May, we don't know yet. It may well be that the SNP find themselves in a position of being the largest party, but not large enough to be a majority. They've been in that position before. At that point, it would be up to them to decide whether to continue as a minority or to approach another party. So they may approach us. We do work well with the SNP, both in government and in opposition.
Do you still work well with them?
We do, absolutely. We've always considered ourselves a critical friend, but we approach it differently than how Labour and the Tories do. And you'll see this at like FMQs, for example, every Thursday at noon. Labour and the Tories, they come in with the attack. They play the man, not the ball. They criticize and they kind of throw down the gauntlet. The Greens, we can be critical, but we don't criticize without bringing solutions. We know, for example, that right now everyone is struggling with the cost of living crisis. The cost of gas and heating our homes has gone up so much, but we know the solution to that is to insulate homes in Scotland and to wean ourselves off that expensive gas. So this is the difference with the Scottish Greens. We bring those kind of constructive ideas and push the SNP to be better. And we would do that in opposition or whether we were in some sort of arrangement with them.
You've mentioned you've been critical friends. Do you think you've been more critical of your friends since John Swinney came into power?
When the Scottish Greens were in the room, when we were part of Butte House, we were able to have substantial influence over things like the Nature Restoration Fund, the budgeting that was put forward for nature, around policy on transportation, that heat and buildings, which I've mentioned already. Since we've left government, the SNP have backtracked on a lot of the things that we worked on together. So yes, I think we have been fairly and reasonably critical about the Scottish Government backtracking, especially on that heat and buildings, especially things on the rent freeze. Tenants in Scotland have been left in a really difficult position where the Scottish Greens, my colleague Patrick Harvey, brought in this emergency rent freeze during the cost of living crisis to protect tenants from staggering rent rises. The Scottish Government have now let that lapse without putting in place any permanent protections, meaning that renters will now be subject to huge rent rises without that protection. So yes, we're quite right to be critical of John Swinney's government when he has taken away the protections that Greens put into place.
And I guess, does that make you more cautious, say, going into another cooperation agreement if that opportunity arises?
It certainly, as I say, would be for our members to decide and to consider. But I think the key lesson here is how much influence the Greens were able to have. When we're in the room, things change. Things are different. Things become better for tenants. More money gets spent on nature. More money gets spent on buses. Things like Nature Scot can be more ambitious when we're in the room. When we're not there pushing things along, the SNP backtrack a bit. So the key message is the SNP need pushing. And with the Greens in the room, we're able to push them further.
Did you go far enough, do you think, in government? Do you think you could have done more in government?
I think we did very well in government. You'll remember there was so many headlines with the green tail wagging the SNP dog, and that is because we were very effective in government. We were able to push the SNP out of their comfort zone.
Issues like climate change targets, issues such as the DRS, was there any sort of, thoughts of reflection on these things?
Deposit return scheme, for example, was a policy the Scottish Government was 100% behind. The legislation for that, as you know, was passed before I was elected. It was something that we were working towards solidly. That was blocked by the UK government at the last minute, a frustrating state that shows the problems with devolution, that the UK government on a whim can stop a policy that the Scottish Government was 100% behind. So that is a frustration that we certainly share with John Swinney and the SNP, that Scotland is limited in what we can do for the environment, for people on benefits, for people needing help because of devolution. And we really think Scotland would be better off as an independent country.
Do you think it's been a difficult tenureship for yourself, Lorna Slater, considering that you have come out of the Butte House Agreement? Has that been a really difficult time, just looking back on that personally?
Coming out of the Butte House Agreement was a transition. What was been effective and powerful about it was being able to see in hindsight what we were able to do in government. Because when you're in government, you're wrapped up in that bond of collective responsibility. And so I think some people it wasn't obvious to them, although we knew exactly how much the Greens were doing and able to achieve. Coming out of that, without us there, you can already see what's unraveling. So you can deduce what was different when we were in this space. So I think it allows us to showcase in hindsight what it was we were able to do. And of course, it's really disappointing that without us there, the SNP have rolled back on those things, rolled back on their climate ambitions. But I think we can be really proud of what we achieved. More free school meals, more hungry kids getting fed, the rollout and increase to the Scottish Child Payment, all that money for nature restoration, ban on incineration, ban on single-use plastics. The list goes on and on. Free bus travel for under 22s, all the things we achieved in government, and I'm really proud of that.
Do you worry that there's a growing number of people who haven't been in the Parliament, who are maybe having their voices heard and want the current leadership to leave?
I don't recognize this idea that there's sort of infighting. There is certainly lively debate, and it is healthy and good that there should be debate about whether going into government and the the compromises that necessarily come with that are worth the influence we were able to have. Now, some members of the party may not agree with that, but because it's a Democratic Party, they are, of course, free to, we encourage that debate, free to express their views. And of course, they're free to stand, both to be MSPs, to be councillors for our internal elections, and that includes leadership posts. So I very much hope that we have people with all different views standing so that we can have those healthy debates. It's a sign of a really vibrant and exciting party that so many people want to get into leadership positions. And that's both within the party, but also want to stand to be MSPs. I'm quite excited about what's coming forward and the level of talent and passion in the party. People feel really strongly. Ultimately, we're all on the same side. We all want to make Scotland a fairer, greener place. We want to stand up for human rights. We want to tax the rich. We want to invest in public services, and we want to build an independent Scotland.
I just want to look at the issue of gender now. What's it been like with trying to achieve a gender balance in your party? And have you any thoughts and reflections on being a woman in a top position in your party?
I think we're all nostalgic for the days when I think 4 of Scotland's leaders were women, when it was Nicola Sturgeon, Ruth Davidson, Kezia Dugdale, and our Maggie Chapman. Politics in those days felt more collegiate. People can disagree on policy, but they pushed against one another in a respectful way. I think now what we see, if you watch an FMQs, it just becomes depressing. It's attack after attack without making any sort of constructive suggestions. There's no sense at FMQs that we are all actually on the same side wanting to build a better Scotland. And I mean, without gender as part of the conversation, one of the really nice things about being part of the cooperation agreement with the SNP was, although we disagree on policies in many places, everybody in that room, every single government minister, whether they were SNP or Green, really cared, really wants the best for Scotland. And to be part of that team, even when you disagree, was great. And I think we're missing that now that we've lost that female leadership. One of the things that's great about the Greens is that we reserve at least one of our places as co-leader for a woman, but that doesn't mean we can't have 2. So maybe the party will elect 2 women to be co-leaders in the summer. Of course it's possible. And how great would that be? To help balance that out, because I think it is going to be a depressing spectacle next year if we have debates, televised debates for Holyrood, and it's all men up there.
Do you have the numbers though of women? Do you think there's enough female candidates who would step forward for the leadership? There's yourself. Do you think
no one else that I know of has said that they're going to stand, but absolutely I hope so. We have so many talented women in our party. I would absolutely expect we would have some people stand.
And can you just reflect on what it's been like, as a woman in power? What sort of, have you come across any abuse, any hate that your male counterparts haven't?
Almost certainly would have done online. Most of my online, I get support from my staff, and that is partly to keep me away from some of the really horrible things on there, when I'm very grateful for my staff for supporting me with that. I mean, on a personal level, I haven't found it too bad because I'm protected in that way.
Do you think your male counterparts have to do that to the same degree?
I don't know. Maybe they do. Certainly all the data that I've seen shows that women are subject to more abuse. I think the most difficult thing in that space was actually as a government minister. And I would show solidarity with other women ministers, for example, Marie Goujon and Marie McCallan. When you're down front, there were certain members, certain men in the chamber who were horrible to female ministers, would call them names, be really aggressive and abusive to them in a way that they simply were not with male ministers. And that was horrible, but that's the kind of main manifestation of it. When you see especially a new minister on the stand doing a ministerial statement, and you just have really horrible opposition men being terrible to them as people rather than about government policy, that is really no way to behave. And I think it's a shame that there are some men in the chamber that think it's okay to treat female ministers that way.
Well, it's an issue of respect, it sounds like.
It is, and it's an issue of tone and of not haranguing ministers, not using insulting language. what we should be doing as opposition politicians is asking ministers difficult questions. But what you see too often in the chamber is an attempt to ask the kind of gotcha question, something that'll make a headline, something that sounds like a clever attack. But actually that means that opposition are giving the government an easy ride, because instead of reading the legislation or the brief carefully and asking difficult questions about real problems, asking the attack question may get them a quick clip on social media, but it means that the Scottish government is not getting asked in-depth questions about its policies. So now that I'm back in opposition, because you asked about the transition, having been in government, I'm aware that we in opposition need to ask better questions. Because I remember being on the stand and getting asked these tiresome kind of gotcha attack questions and thinking, well, I know there's problems in here, but nobody's asked me about it, because they didn't bother to become familiar enough with the material, and they didn't bother to ask the real questions the opposition should be asking.
There was a real issue with the Greens, quite a while back, of them having a bad reputation of having older men in power and older men leading the party. Do you think that's been stamped out? Do you think there's still an issue of a lad culture in your own party?
Just the numbers would seem to disagree with that. We have 4 of our 7 MSPs are women. Many of our internal party posts are held by women. Obviously, 1 co-leader post. Our 2 co-conveners of council, that's our main strategy body within the party, are women. Our co-chair of our executive is a woman. Our co-chairs on many of our key committees are necessarily women. Our elections and campaigns committee are women. So no, I would absolutely disagree with that. Most of the senior party posts within our party are held by women.
Are you able to continue that for Holyrood 2026? Do you think you'll still be able to get women, a decent ratio of women to men in MSP positions?
Absolutely. And part of that is because we're starting from such a strong space. We actually got 5 women and 3 men elected at the last election. Alison Johnson went to be our presiding officer, leaving us with 4 and 3. So our incumbency ratio is already the highest of any other party, in that we have more women than men. We have so much talent within the party. There are definitely women willing and able to come forward in every region of Scotland to stand. And we're in a position where that means that our members will have that option. And I very much hope that our members will choose to vote when they're voting for their candidate selections for a really diverse group of MSPs. But yes, I'm absolutely confident we will have excellent gender balance. Hopefully continuing the gender overrepresentation of women. I would love that.
Great. I think just finally, just going back on your point about the ad hominem attacks, do you think that was an inherently down to the fact that there's a lot of male leaders?
I think there is probably an element of that. There's probably an element of what people have been calling the Westminsterization of Holyrood, where it's moved from being a more collegiate space, yes, we disagree, but we all want that from to Scotland, to a kind of winner-takes-all space. And I think that's where, even without gender in the mix, the SNP and Greens working together broke that mold, because we can say, like, we might disagree completely on things like green ports, free ports, but we can still work together in these areas. Whereas the Labour and the Tories seem to be in this world where they want power for themselves, would never think about working with anyone else, and they can just attack. And that isn't the kind of constructive space that Holyrood was designed to be. And I think that's a real shame. And I'm proud of us for taking a different approach.
So going forward for Holyrood 2026, we need a wee bit more reflection on that.
I think that's true. And to be fair, behind the scenes in Holyrood, there is a lot more collegiate work on the committees, socializing with one another, working on cross-party groups. There is a lot of collegiate working. I'm just sad that we don't see it in that leadership space, especially FMQs.
Lorna Slater, thank you very much for joining us on Unspun Live.
Delighted to be here.
So that was Hannah's interview with Scottish Greens co-leader Lorna Slater. But looking to the week ahead, Hannah, we've got quite a busy week.
Yeah.
We've got a landmark ruling between For Women Scotland and the Scottish Government on what the legal definition is of a woman. It's a long running issue that has been going on now for, I think, since 2018. It's a really big debate that has really taken over the political sphere. We're finally going to get that ruling from the Supreme Court. And to be honest, I think this could have really wide-ranging repercussions on UK equality law.
Definitely.
Sources are telling me that the law could need to be completely ripped up and changed. So I think it's definitely one to watch. Anything you've got your eye on for this week?
Just saying on that, we're planning on full analysis, full stories on the day, so we can expect quite a lot coming out on the Wednesday. So do keep your eye on the Herald's coverage of that, because we'll be keeping you very up to date with that. Other things that have come out already from this week is that the First Minister has just hosted a press conference, so we're recording on Monday, and I've just been to the press conference in Bute House in Edinburgh, dash back to Bath Street here at the Herald offices in Glasgow. But yeah, really interesting. Basically, the First Minister has pushed forward his programme for government. Usually you expect a programme for government to come out in September, the government's kind of legislative plans for the year ahead, but we are going to see it next month, May the 6th, and John Swinney's idea is that it's going to give us a full year ahead of the Holyrood elections, which will be happening on May the 7th, 2026. It's going to give us a full year to prep and plan on a delivery plan, he says, for the Scottish Government. He says he wants his government to be laser focused on delivery. He mentioned the NHS and other domestic issues. But he also had a huge focus on Trump's tariffs, and he told journalists when asked, I was one of the journalists asking him about a potential threat of a recession here in Scotland, and he said, you know, it does risk Scotland entering a recession, Trump's tariffs, and we've got to be aware and be mindful of that. So yeah, really interesting that he's now wanting to push forward with his plans, make sure that he's got an economic plan. I think he was saying that he wants to bring together on Wednesday as well, the same day as the verdict for Women Scotland. We can expect the First Minister hosting a talk with trade unions and business investors. He hopes that that will then shape conversations going forward with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He's already had us talk about global uncertainty with him this Friday that he said was constructive, but he wants to continue going on with those talks. He said even though, you know, the UK government, it's up to them to do trade deals with the US, he still wants to be confident that the best decisions are being made within those negotiations. So he really wants Scotland to have a seat at the table, so he says.
I think the interesting thing about his announcements, though, is it was kind of overshadowed by the fact that it was revealed at the weekend that ministers had been given a £20,000 pay rise.
Yeah.
He was asked about that, wasn't he?
Yeah, so that came up in discussions in Bute House after, when the journalists were asking questions after his statement. Journalists mentioned, you know, what's your take on this, and why are you not telling your ministers not to take this pay rise?
Because also it comes at a time when council tax is going up massively in a lot of councils.
Scots are struggling.
So I think he had to kind of defend it and
defend the indefendable for some people. You know, who gets a 20k pay rise these days? His argument is that, you know, Salmon did away with that almost a decade ago. He froze the pay rise for ministers. Got to bear in mind that financial crash just happened, so it was very important for the government to look like they weren't big spenders. But it's interesting that this has happened at this time when everyone's struggling.
He's talking about potential recession, which is something that Alex Salmond was talking about 16 years ago. And then when he froze it, and now it's been unfrozen, and there is, of course, a pay rise. So it's just an interesting in time, and I think it gives us a lot of the food for thought.
Yeah, exactly.
For the week ahead. Also
interesting, and just feel like I should mention it, is that the First Minister has made clear that he's not going to take the pay rise. He's saying that, you know, today he told journalists he's the decision maker and he doesn't want to look like he benefits.
So that's all from us this week. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join us next week.